the Lincoln Park Jewish Center and el Centro de Estudios Judíos Torah de Manny from 311 Central Park Avenue, Yonkers, New York presents Divrei Torah with Rabbi Manny.
Okay, I'm going to start with discussing ink. The halakha is brought down. Sefer Torah, you have to write with halakha Moshe Sinai. That Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzah are written with dio. Dio, everybody here is going to translate as ink, and that is a mistake. Right? For that, I'll give credit to the Satmar people that the Hebrew has corrupted the halakha. Right? So. In Lashon Kodesh, right, in Gemara, what the Gemara means by dio, and the Rambam tells you exactly how to make dio, you take, right, soot, right, which the Rambam tells you how to collect, right. You will take an oil lamp, which I don't have, preferably olive oil. You're going to suspend a glass or a metal dish in the flame. And instead of letting the soot go up, you're going to collect all the lamp black on the bottom of the dish. You're going to take all this lamp black, which you cannot write with because it's just dirt, right? Soot. You're going to mix it with some sort of glue, which the Rambam says is gum arabic. It's available. Sap of acacia trees. You're going to mix that together, and then you are going to, I want this, I can't find it. Okay. This is how it comes from the tree. This is how it comes from the Jello factory. Right. And you mix this together with water. It will be like tar or like a dough. You form it into, the Rambam says, little wafers. You dry them. You smear them with oil. You put them away. When you want to use this ink, right, which you can't use because it's dry, you have to soak the ink, which is what the Mishnah says, shorin es hadio. You will soak this in water. It will reconstitute into ink, totally water soluble, and you can write with this ink. And the Rambam says, and everybody says, this is dio min hamuvchar. And obviously this is the dio in the Chumash because you have Pasha Sota, which you can run underwater, and it totally erases, right? This is dio min hamuvchar. You can still buy dio like this, right? If you go to Chinatown, because they still use ink like this, right? So for $1.50 or $1.75, you get a little brick of ink, which they sell you with a stone, which has a little well, little depression to put water in. You grind it into the water, and you have your ink, right? None of the Sofrim use this ink. In spite of the fact that everybody says this is dio min hamuvchar, none of the Sofrim use this ink, right? What the Sofrim do, they take 3 ingredients. They take, number 1, afotzim. Afotzim are gall nuts which come from oak trees, but they're not really part of the oak tree. This is a gall wasp nest. So if the tree gets infected with wasp larvae, the tree gets infected, produces these little wooden balls, and most of them have a little hole where the wasp left. So these things are very high in tannic acid. So the truth is, in different countries, they use different things. In Morocco, you could use pomegranate skins, which are not as concentrated as this, but they'll take the skins from the pomegranates, soak them in water, pour it on another bunch of skins, peels, they'll do it 2 or 3 times to concentrate it. That's their afotzim. But you have to have some sort of tannic acid. Then you take kankantom. So kankantom is translated in all the Sfarim as the copper vitriol, kippur-Wasser, right? So as a kid, I tried this, right? Because I had some, one of my friends filled some copper sulfate crystals from the lab, right? And it doesn't work. And I was telling him in shul that it doesn't work, and a very nice guy behind me, who used to be an apothecary, actually made pills And he told me, of course, because Kipperwasser is iron sulfate. And I asked him, why would Kipperwasser be iron sulfate? He said, because that's what it is, right? And sure enough, if you take iron sulfate, right, which this is, so iron sulfate is a mineral which will be prescribed for you if you're anemic, right? When you add the iron sulfate to the tannic acid water, it just turns black like that, right? So basically, that's the ink. The fact that it is, this semantic problem even carries over into Kahati. If you read that Mishnah where it says Kankantom, he translates it in Hebrew as Chomer Nechoshet Me'ura B'mayim, right? Because he's translating Kipperwasser, right? If you look in the English dictionary, which Rabbi Goldberg told me to do, look up the word copperous, right? And in parentheses, it actually says Kipperwasser. It has nothing to do, it's Old English, very, very old Yiddish, has nothing to do with copper. It's iron sulfate. It's a totally different etymology where this comes from. In any event, those are the two main ingredients of the ink, and you add gum arabic just to thicken it up. Yeah?
Why don't the Sofrim use?
The Kesset Sofer says he has no clue because he made the other one. I also made the other one, and it writes well, right? He has no clue as to why they Sofrim switched. But even at the time of the Ramah is already writing, you're still using Ashan Shmonim, you're still using Sud, right? For some reason they switched.
You want a piece of pomegranates, yeah.
They all know what pomegranates are, right? Yeah.
When did they switch?
When did they switch?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell because there are different recipes all over the place, right? Which is another problem. The problem with ink is the Sofer writes something, and the Sofrim used to make their own ink, all the Sofrim. And everybody has a different variation of ingredients, right? Which affects the final product. And then you use this product, right? And by the time this really starts to disintegrate, the Sofer is dead, right? So 150 years later, right? Nobody has any clue as to why this one's disintegrating and why this one is fine. And in general, you have two problems with this ink, two major practical problems with this ink. Number one is that this is iron-based ink. So this is going to oxidize and it fades, right? And it fades and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter and it gets reddish. So this is a problem. So some of the Sephardi poskim say, since the ink has to be black, that's the halacha. If it's not black, the article is pasul. Our minig is according to Chassam Sofer, right? Chassam Sofer says, since it is the nature of dio, see this is the big problem, since this is the nature of dio to turn color, therefore as long as it has any shachrus, any darkness, meaning if it's brown, still dark, right? It's kosher, right? Now, the way I define dio, that Chassam Sofer is very difficult because it is not the nature of dio to turn any other color because carbon is an absolutely basic element and it will never, ever, ever change to any other thing, right? So that's Chassam Sofer is based on whatever, but Chassam Sofer has a lot of power, right? And the minig, even brought down from Rabosha, the minig, and by all of us, all the Ashkenazim for sure, is that as long as it's not red, and nobody knows what red is, maybe his jacket is red, I don't know, because nobody wants to actually postle anything, right? But didn't. They do now. But they didn't used to. So it's a problem, right? So generally, but that's the better of your two options here with this thing. The other option is a disaster option. The other option is what's called springing, kofetz, right? So the ink, for some reason, just dries out and just starts peeling off. It's a disaster, right? And when you get a whole Sefer Torah like this, it's like almost impossible to fix. You could scrape off all the letters, put them back. If you scrape them all off and put them back, so the new ink is going to hold, right? But if you just try to go over it, it's like a never-ending thing. When you see something springing, and you could feel it. If you put your hand on a urea and go like this, it should feel nice and smooth. If you feel like sand, you know, this is like bad news, right? So people are very averse to changing the formulas because they don't know exactly where they're going with this, right? So actually in Kaf HaChaim, in Kol Yaakov, he curses the people who put alcohol into the ink, which was a Russian thing, right? So the Russian recipe for ink is to take the walnuts and soak them in vodka, right? Russia, right? So you soak it in vodka, right? When the vodka turns red, right, you pour it into a frying pan, you heat it, and when it's boiling, you throw in the iron sulfate and you toss in a match, and you burn off the top. It will separate into two inks. The top one was called Russian ink, high gloss, stunning ink, right? And when I was a kid at this yeshiva, they still printed this recipe in the back of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, right? Which they don't anymore. Right? And this ink, 50 years later, totally turned to dust. Most beautiful sperm turned to dust. So he curses people who change the recipes, right? Not that the current recipes are so great, right? And in Lubavitch, you have Rabbi Zirkin, who invented acrylic ink, right, which his students use, right? Which also in the beginning was very dicey, you know, very touchy, because he didn't have it perfected. So people check tefillin, and you open up the parsha, and you go, wow, that's an olive, intact. It just came off in my hand, it's rubber. You know? So, that didn't go well with the other sofrim. But he perfected it, the bonding or whatever, the curing, whatever, and they still use it in Crown Heights. His students use that ink, right? So the bottom line is that the ink has to be black. Now, according to the Rabino Tam, if you put kankantom into the ink is possible, because you have to use, we know from the Gemara that the ink was dry, right? We can prove that from the Gemara. And to check Dam Nida, one of the Tanoim used to carry as his basic color black, he carried a piece of dio in his pocket, right? So we know the ink was dry. The Rabbeinu Tam wants to take this as a thing that has to be ink that can dry. Meiri says he has no clue as to what the Rabbeinu Tam is talking about, because if you leave the cover off, every ink will become dry, right? And the truth is, even this kind of ink, in the 1890s in America, they had ink pills for people traveling on ships, right? So you had a package of ink pellets, which is this just evaporated till it dries, right? And you could reconstitute this also. So Meiri doesn't understand that at all. But we are posketing basically like the Rambam. So the Rambam is a very big chiddush. He's saying that when it says halacha l'moshe misinai kosvim b'dio, he says not dio dafka, anything which is shachar k'dio. Anything which is shachar k'dio. So when I practically have to tell people to fix Sefer Torah, I always tell them, do me a favor, don't ask for a feather anymore, because then I get a call half an hour later, there's ink all over the Sefer Torah. Not interested, right? Go to the store, buy a pilot pen, right? Which has all, and l'chatchili is supposed to have kosher ingredients. Today that is almost absolutely not a problem, because there's nothing natural in the entire outside this building, right? Because everything is synthetic, right? So this particular ink, I checked out with the company. There's no animal products whatsoever in this ink, right? And even that is like a semi-concern, because b'diavad, if you did it, it'd still be kosher, right? So these kind of pens are excellent for fixing a little tab, fixing a psul when you're in the mountains in a Sefer Torah, because you're not going to have ink and all this stuff around, okay?
What kind of pen again?
Pilot, right? And these are actually like regular, there's liquid ink in here. It's like regular, it says, it's a new kind of technology, regular liquid black ink, and it happens to match perfectly, but perfectly, with the ink that they use for Sefer Torah. You cannot tell the difference. So you can fix little tiny things.
Is it indelible?
Yeah, anything that has the iron in it is indelible.
But it's not water soluble.
Not water soluble, no. You could take anything you write with this and run it through a washing machine. It'll still be legible. Kasha, I don't know, because maybe whatever. But you'll be able to read this stuff. Yeah.
How is it that we can use the nuts that come from the wasps? The wasp is not a kosher insect.
It's not a product.
First of all, you're not using the wasp, but using the wood.
It's a tumor. Basically, it's a tumor.
Oh, so that's the wood that the wasp.
Right. It's a tumor.
And even if you did, you could ask these questions with, how did they make, I don't know, the Tolah Shoni, and how did they do whatever, or Tachash from last week's Parsha, This whole idea of min hamuta v'ficha is not so clear that it applies to other stuff, right? I mean, once I wanted to fix a Torah they sent over a Sefer Torah from Rav Moshe to fix an Eitz Chaim. So the person who brought it over told me that I should use kosher glue to glue it together. There is this concept of kadesh atzmecha v'mutaloch, right? The only thing that threw me was that the Eitz Chaim was ivory. So I went like, wow. So I didn't really see where this is coming from. Okay? Okay. So now Manny's going to talk about
Okay.
Just one more question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why can't you let the whole Sefer Torah, please?
This is a very skinny point and it will look terrible. Believe me, now they have with the heshes they have now. You don't have to know how to cut a pen. They have plastic points. Well, the hesh is more about you know, not that it needs the hesher, but calm people down. Right? Plastic points.
So that's
That's
just touch-up, basically.
Yeah. But, you know, the people who make the pens also make bottles of ink
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are synthetic. And
Yeah.
That's okay to use?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything black ink. That's the law.
The only concern that I've noticed is that when you expose the Sefer Torah to moisture, sometimes they'll bleed a little bit, the inks. So you have to be very careful about which ink you choose, which would be a synthetic ink. That's all. Yeah. It should look nice. Right. All right. Let me begin by first of all, I want you to know that I received permission from my Rebbe to speak here. So Rabbi Schneid is my Rebbe. I actually have Kabbalah and Sofrut from Yeshiva University, from the Bell School of Jewish Music. So I'm going to speak today about making klaf, but I have to start by telling you a quick story. I wanted, after learning all of the halachot, I wanted to see actually how it's done, because many of you probably know there's a difference between reading about something and actually making it. So at that time I was working as a social worker. I think you may remember this. At that time I was working as a social worker, and I had access. I worked for the Archdiocese of New York, and it was in Highbridge, right? Not far from here actually. And I had access to some basements. So I went to Arthur Avenue, and I asked the butchers on Arthur Avenue if they could give me some of the skins that they had. So they understood, yes, Rabbi, absolutely, whatever you want. They saved me these wonderful skins. I come around Easter time, they call me up, they've got 6, 7 skins. I go down there, pick them up, I salt them, I take one of the basements, I try it out, and I did such a horrible job. But basically, what I did was I fleshed out all of the skins, and I thought I had removed from the back of the skin all of the fats and the veins that were necessary to be removed. I salted them, and then I took lime, seed. I took lime, the mineral, and I mixed it into a big drum, and I put the skins in. And I figured it was gonna work out beautifully. I waited 20 days, and then the cops came. I'm gonna tell you what happened. The skins rotted so badly that they thought that there was a dead body in the right? Now try explaining that to the cops. Oh no, well, I'm a social worker, but I also happen to be a scribe, and I was trying, and I had to let them in the building, and then it was so disgusting, because what happened was I didn't get all of the fats and the veins off of the back of the skin. So then I came up with another scheme, and that was I found out a guy who makes piano elbows. In the pianos, there are little leather, they look like that, little elbows that are made out of leather that move the hammers in there. So I found out that he has a tannery. So I called them up, and Rabbi Schneid and I went down there, and we actually went through the entire system there, and we began to make klaf of our own. And what I want to do is I'm just going to pass around some of the photos. What you'll see is the drum where you actually put the klaf in. Well, actually, you don't put the klaf in there. You put the skins in there. So you get a hide. At that time, we used, the first visit that I got, we used Burger King hides. Best, excellent. They don't have to be shechted, so you know that it's a kosher animal. It's a cow, right? You take the skin. You grab, well, this skin is beginning to fall apart because I stopped the process. But if you take the skin, you can see that this is the hair side, and this is the meat side. So you see all the little, I'm going to pass this around for you to see. You see all the little material that's on there? That's the stuff that has to be removed. So you take the hide and you put it over a hump or some sort of a a sawhorse, and you take a sharp knife and you just run it over the entire thing until you remove the layers of fat and veins that are attached. Then we put it inside of a barrel. Pass it around. Then we put it inside of a barrel with salt water. And what it does is spins, the barrel is constantly spinning, so it softens the skin, and then we pull it out and we flesh it again. So we remove whatever got soft from the salt water process and from the beating that it took. Then you actually take it, after you take it out of the barrel, and you put it like in a big bathtub. This is what the bathtub looks like. You put it in a big tub with lime and water. I'm going to pass it around so you can see that. And you make basically a lasagna. The lasagna looks like this. You take you make the lime and water nice and thick, a soup, right? You put the hair side down, the meat side up. Then you take the next layer, right? You fill it up like a lasagna. You put the next one, the meat side down and the hair side up, and you go stacking them, right? After a couple of days, around 15 days, the lime dehairs the cloth completely, and it looks something like this. Now, let me just tell you that this, you see the holes in it? That was my mistakes. But it's a learning process, right? So when I was actually fleshing, this is a deer skin. When I was actually fleshing it, I kept on making holes in it because I kept on poking it. Now I'm better. So all of these are actually, and then when you put it in the lime, those small little holes turn into big. It's like a hole in your sock, right? So just what I wanted you to see mostly here is you can. I did not sand this so that you could actually get a sense of this. Still stuck to the back of the skin, you'll see that there's a little bit of greasy material and also veiny material. And then on the other side, that's very smooth, is actually where the hair side was. Claf is actually, I drove up to Ithaca, New York, to go to Cornell University, where there's an expert in leather clothing. So I spoke to him for a while, and he explained to me that parchment is actually not a tanned skin, it is actually a preserved skin. Now, what I realized from that is that if you took it and you cut the cloth, if you are seeing the cloth this way, but if I cut it and I look at it in the narrow part, you would actually see that there's a whole bunch of holes that are part of a skin of an animal. When you actually preserve a cloth, when you make a cloth, you actually fill all the holes with lime, and that preserves the skin. So when you are erasing on a piece of cloth, you can simply sand it, right? And you take off the layers of the skin, but since the holes in the skin are all filled with the dust, right, of the lime, it doesn't make a hole in it unless you sand it a lot, right? So what we would do with that cloth, I'll explain in a second what I mean by this. So what we would do with that cloth is I would take that cloth, stretch it, and then I would sand where the meat side was, and that would be the actual cloth. So I'll just pass around a piece of this, and you'll get a sense of this.
Not lime. I mean, where the holes are, you haven't filled in with an artificial material.
What it is they're tiny. Just think of them as small little holes. So the entire piece is made out of multiple holes, right? They're almost like cell holes, right? So they're filled completely. So the material, the lime, is actually preserving the skin, as opposed to what I'm going to show you next, which is a completely different process. But this is actually cloth, all right? And that's what most Sefer Torah today that you're accustomed to seeing.
And there were microscopic holes that are filled in with lime.
With lime, right? And so you're writing really on the skin and the lime. Yeah. So let me just pass it around so you can get a sense of this. Run your fingers over the cloth, and you can feel the fuzziness of it, because what we did was basically this is the hair side and this is the meat side, and you can actually feel. We begin by sanding it with a coarse sanding, and then with a finer sanding, and that's what actually creates the cloth.
And we write on the meat side.
On the meat side. Yes. That's my question. We write on the meat side. Now I'm going to show you something else. Okay, so you understand the idea? By the way, the smell You remember that smell? It's a beautiful smell, isn't it? The smell is absolutely fantastic. Yeah? The way you wash your clothes after you've made klaf is by throwing them away. I just want to mention that. And in fact, we know from the Gemara that if a woman wants a get and says that her husband's a tanner, everybody understands what that is. Yeah.
There's an aphorism in the Gemara somewhere that if you go to a leather shop and don't buy anything, you still come out smelling bad.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's what happened to me. But let me tell you, the really nice thing about going through and making this is that after about the first 10 minutes, you want to just die. It's a horrible, horrible odor. After about 10 minutes, your nose just basically turns off.
And what step does it start smelling bad? Before or after the
Well, when you first get if the skins are fresh, they really don't smell. They smell like the animal. That's not a bad smell, right? Compared to the rest, right? Once you put the skins in the salt water and they sit there for 2-3 days, the smell is absolutely horrible, absolutely horrible. And then actually, while they're soaking in the lime, it's not so bad because that's absorbing everything.
Right.
Also, I want to tell you that the experience of pulling out the hairs. Oh, here's some pictures. This picture, I'll pass these around. There's the experience of pulling out the skins.
Yeah.
You could just run your fingers over the skin,
and all the hair comes off.
And all the hair just comes off. It's like a depilatory. You throw it out. Yeah. Right?
I was reading somewhere. There was a friend of mine was trained as a tanner, Allah Shalom, and he told me that an ancient technique for tanning was to take the skins. I don't know what they did before, but they would dig a pit, fill the pit with oak leaves, put these skins in the pit with the oak leaves, and leave it there for a month or two over the winter.
I just want to mention to you that yes, the first thing you have to understand, that's why I was actually talking about the idea that klaf is actually a preserved skin. It is not a tanned skin. It is actually a preserved skin. So what that means is that if you wet a Sefer Torah, if you wet it, right, or if you wet a piece of klaf, right, if you wet a piece of klaf and you put it onto a mold, it stays in that mold, right, because it will begin to dry and it begins to take that shape. So if you make, for example, bottom, right, and you begin to shape the bottom with this type of klaf, you can actually mold it into a specific shape. And that's because it's a preserved skin. Now I'm going to talk about actual tanned leather, which is actually called gevil. Now if you look at a Sefer Torah, now before I move on, go ahead.
I just wanted to understand something. Were you doing this just as an exercise, or are you actually in the cloth business? Because I understand a sofa writes mezuzahs, goes to a cloth guy and buys a cloth.
Right.
I mean, what is your motivation? Just to understand it?
Well, I have two motivations. One is that I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about what it is to be a sofer, because I really I wanted to be a sofer.
Right.
So I didn't want to just have it as a theoretical. The second reason is because he's my Rebbe. So he
made you do it.
He inspired me to know every piece of what I'm doing. Not just, in other words,
so that was the exercise to understand.
To understand.
But basically today, that's not how it works.
Today, we hire other people to do it for us, but we should know what we're doing. I mean, somebody has to do it, right? Yeah.
If you're using the cloth for mezuzah or whatever,
same process.
Have to be shech?
No, it does not have to be shech. No, but it has to be from a kosher species. It has to be from a kosher species.
Is there any difference in the end product on what kind of animal started out as?
Yeah, you could get,
a deer or a cow or a sheep?
They look basically the same. To the untrained eye, they look basically the same. Right? Now, if I made gevil, it will look different, based upon the type of animal. All right, so here's the next. Yeah.
Just one thing. When I bought my grandson's film, they talked about putting it in the freezer for months. Is that valid? Is there such a thing of later, after the batim are formed or whatever?
In the freezer? You've heard that before? I never heard that before.
I don't know, maybe just that they were put away at the
I never heard that before. Let me just tell you that
They just thought they were cool.
Gasot Batim today, right? 150 years old, basically what they are. If you take a raw hide, the same raw hide chew that dogs get, yeah. So basically, you take the skin and you soak it in lime and water. You leave it as a fat skin. Usually they use the neck of the bull, which is a very thick skin, right? And if you take that and you dry it, it will dry into whatever shape you assign it. You could roll it into a bone, right? The shape of the bone. That's what they sell for dogs to chew, right? If you soak it in hot water, it will become like soft, and then you could put it into a mold and it will take that shape. So it's basically the same thing, but it's a preserved skin, right? Now, next adventure was to understand what gevil was. So I went out on an expedition and I collected a whole bunch of dog excrement. Now, those of you who live here at YU probably, or come around Manhattan, you know where to get dog excrement. So, by the way, the best dog excrement that I realized, just so you know, the best dog excrement is the one that's been sitting on the sidewalk for a really, really long time and has already turned a certain color of white, and it gives a very, very nice. You collect a lot of dog excrement. You put it into a, I'm not joking, by the way. You put it into a barrel. I tried it. I did it in the basement of the building. And you take hot water, and you take the afatzim, the same gall nuts. You crush those. You mix them together. You do the same process of fleshing the back of the skin. You let it soak for a number of days. When it comes out, it dehairs the skin and preserves the skin. Because dog excrement is so high in tannic acid that it's almost as if you cooked the skin. So now the skin is a completely different thing. The other one is a preserved klaf, right? Is a preserved skin. This one is actually one that has actually changed. And now, if you understand it, when I was talking about all the little holes in the klaf, this one, all the holes in the skin are actually empty. So the skin becomes almost like puffed up. And by the way, as I pass this around, you'll notice that we actually write on the hair side, and the back of the Sefer Torah would be the meat side. Now the way that we would erase here, if you take a razor blade now, or if you take a grinding instrument and you scrape this, you will never write on it again. Because you take off the entire top layer of the skin, now your writing material is gone, and as soon as you put ink on there, it bleeds, right? So the only way to do that would be, I have to give them the secret recipe, is to take lemon juice and water, mix them together, take a Q-tip, and you water down the ink until you can actually rewrite on it. Or, if it's really an impossible thing, you have to make a patch. So the way to make a patch would be to take a piece of gevil and to put it on the back, cut through both pieces of the gevil, and then push the new one through, and then make a patch on the back, and they match very nicely. Now I've always also noticed that if I take some of the shavings from the back of the gevil and I mix it with glue and I shove it into there and then I sand it, it looks pretty good. It doesn't look like you can hardly see the patch. So I'm going to pass around two. One is, this is a piece of gevil, and also Rabbi Schneid brought with him a very nice old urea Sephardi that we'll pass around for you to see of what it actually looks like when you actually write on it. Yeah?
Do we, the Ashkenazi, do we write Sefer Torah on Gevil?
I have never seen an Ashkenazi. Have you seen an Ashkenazi Sefer Torah on Gevil? The Rambam, by the way, says that would be the best material to use.
Gevil. Well, he was fine.
Yeah. Any other question? All right. So you might ask me. I'll answer your question in a second. You might ask me. Some have asked me, why dog excrement? What's the story with the dog excrement? So how come such a holy thing is made with dog excrement? I just want to mention. There you know it. It is schar for the dogs because on the night of Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? So the dogs get two rewards, right? One of the rewards is that they get to chew the bones of the Karban Pesach or whatever's left of the thing. The other is that that we can use their dog excrement for making holy objects like a Sefer Torah. So this is one of the schar for the dogs. Yeah, go ahead.
At the museum in the Beit Knesset Gadol in Yerushalayim, they have a little museum there. In that museum, they have a Sefer Torah that was written on Gevil.
Right. I have a Sefer Torah in my shul that is written on Gevil. I'm actually writing now a Megillat Esther on Gevil, and I actually went to a leatherworking store, and I bought these presses. They're beautiful flower presses, and around the edges of the Gevil Megillah that I'm writing now, I've been punching beautiful pattern of flowers all the way along. It looks very, very nice. It's almost like saddle leather. You know what I want to mention? That a lot of ladies, Italian ladies' gloves, the very, very soft, fancy, handmade gloves, are made in the same way. They're very beautiful type of leather. Go ahead. Yes.
Other sources of tannic acid, like tea, coffee has tannic acid.
Right. Those are a little bit weaker, but you can use them. I have used tea to color my patches. So if I can't get a leather that'll match when I make the patch, I'll soak it in tea and make it look similar. It's very important in general, and when we're talking also about ink, about dio, I want to tell you, I was zochet to visit Rabbi Schneid at his house, and one of my first visits there, I saw that he had a whole bunch of bottles of ink. So I asked him, like, what are you doing? How much are you going to write in one lifetime? You have so many. So he showed me there's many different colors of shininess, right? So when sofrim that are careful about what they're doing, if you're going to fill in letters on a Sefer Torah, you want to make sure that it looks right. It's a very important thing. Yeah, that it should match. Yeah? Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, which is a better? Which has a longer life?
A longer life is Gevil. Gevil has a much longer life.
Why?
The Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way, if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're made out of Gevil.
Why is Gevil less longer than cloth?
Because it's not a preserved skin, it is a tanned skin. So it has changed into, it's almost like if you cooked the whole skin. Yeah? Yes? How many animals? What's the average?
50 or 60.
That's what I'd say. 50, 60. Okay, so now you already heard. So now you already heard about the dio, and you already heard about klaf. Now we're going to assemble it.
The Lincoln Park Jewish Center and el Centro de Estudios Judíos Torah de Med from 311 Central Park Avenue, Yonkers, New York, presented Divrei Torah with Rabbi Manny. Visit our website www.toratropical.com and www.lpjc.org. Shalom.